The Chaos Gods recoiled in terror. The Emperor fell silent upon his golden throne, and warriors of humanity screamed at the elderly gentleman that refused to save them. A being so powerful it made the Emperor himself question 10,000 years of sacrifice. But when the presence finally spoke, revealing why it would watch billions die without lifting a finger, would the Imperium discover that the cruelest god isn't one who demands sacrifice, but one who grants absolute freedom to choose damnation? The fortress world of Cadia had stood for 10,000 years against the forces of darkness. Its black stone pylons reached toward the sky like the fingers of a buried giant, each one humming with ancient power that kept the Eye of Terror from swallowing the galaxy whole. Within the fortress walls, millions of soldiers stood ready. They had trained since childhood to fight, to die, to hold the line against the endless hordes that poured from the warp. The Cadian motto was simple. Cadia. It stands. It always had. It always would. But on this day, the 13th Black Crusade had reached its terrible peak. Abaddon, the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos, had finally broken through every defense. His massive warships hung in orbit like diseased moons, dropping corruption and death upon the surface. The ground shook as Chaos Titans, war machines 300 feet tall, strode across the battlefield, crushing entire companies beneath their feet. Lasgun fire lit the smoke-filled air like angry fireflies. The thunder of artillery never stopped, not even for a second. Soldiers screamed orders that no one could hear over the roar of war. In the center of the Cassir Plain, where 50 million soldiers clashed in desperate combat, something changed. Not with noise or violence, but with silence. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. A Space Marine's bolter round froze mid-flight. A Chaos cultist's scream caught in his throat. The massive Chaos Titan took one more step, then stopped, its corrupted machine spirit suddenly quiet. Every warrior on that blood-soaked plain, Imperial and traitor alike, felt an overwhelming compulsion to turn and look at the exact same spot. Reality did not tear. It did not bleed or scream or crack. It simply opened, as naturally as a flower blooming at dawn. Where there had been empty air scarred by lost fire and shells, now stood a man. An elderly gentleman with a neatly trimmed white mustache, wearing a dark suit that looked like it belonged in an ancient Earth museum, and a black bowler hat perched perfectly upon his head. His face was kindly, grandfatherly, with eyes that held infinite patience. He stood with perfect calm, his hands clasped behind his back, a walking stick resting against his arm, completely at peace in the center of the most violent battle the galaxy had ever seen. He looked like he might be out for a pleasant afternoon stroll through a park, except the park was hell itself. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds, an eternity on a battlefield where every moment meant death. Then, all at once, every living mind within 100 miles understood the same message. Not words spoken aloud, but meaning pressed directly into their thoughts with gentle, irresistible force. I am here to observe. Lord Castellan Creed stood atop the walls of Cassir Tyrock, his command staff frozen around him. His cigar had fallen from his lips, forgotten. Through his magnoculars, he watched the gentleman in the dark suit standing perfectly still while lost fire and bullets passed through him like he was made of nothing but air. A Chaos Space Marine charged the figure with a chain axe raised high. The corrupted weapon swung through the old man's form without resistance, and the traitor stumbled forward, confused and enraged. "What in the Emperor's name is that?" whispered Colonel Kell, Creed's oldest friend and second in command. Creed did not answer. He could not. His tactical mind, trained through 50 years of constant war, could not categorize this new element. It was not an enemy. It was not an ally. It simply was. On the battlefield below, the soldiers began to recover from their shock. Imperial guardsmen, their faith beaten into them since birth, looked at the elderly gentleman and saw hope. Surely this was a miracle. Surely the Emperor had sent salvation. They resumed firing at the Chaos forces with renewed vigor, their prayers growing louder. The traitors, twisted by decades in the warp, saw only another enemy to destroy. They turned their weapons on the suited figure, pouring fire into his position. Bolt rounds, plasma blasts, even the corrupted energies of warp-spawned sorcery all passed through the gentleman without effect. The battle resumed with even greater desperation than before. Each side fought harder, hoping to prove themselves worthy in front of this strange witness. The dead piled higher. The screams grew louder. The gentleman in the dark suit did not move. He simply watched, occasionally adjusting his bowler hat as explosions rocked the ground around him. 3 hours later, a golden light descended from the sky, cutting through the smoke and ash. Saint Celestine, the living saint of the Imperium, landed before the suited figure with her wings of pure flames spread wide. She was humanity's greatest champion, a woman who had died and returned to life multiple times through the Emperor's will. Her armor shone with holy light. Her blessed blade crackled with righteous fury. Behind her, thousands of soldiers watched, hoping, praying for intervention. "Spirit," she called out, her voice carrying across the battlefield with supernatural clarity. "If you serve the Emperor, aid his faithful. If you stand against him, face his judgment. But do not simply watch while his children die." The old gentleman turned to regard her, tipping his bowler hat slightly in polite acknowledgement. For the first time, he moved, a slight tilt of his head that seemed almost curious. When he responded, the words appeared in Celestine's mind with the weight of absolute truth. "I do not interfere. I witness all choices, judge all souls, but the path must be walked freely." Celestine's perfect features twisted with confusion and growing horror. "You claim to judge souls, yet you let them be slaughtered? You have the power to end this suffering. I can feel it radiating from you. Why do you refuse? Because to act is to choose for them. I am here only to see what they choose for themselves." "That is madness," Celestine whispered, though her voice still carried to the watching soldiers. "The Emperor acts. The Emperor protects. A god who does nothing is no god at all." The gentleman regarded her with what might have been sadness in his gentle eyes. "I am not your Emperor. I am something he does not wish to acknowledge." Before Celestine could respond, a tremor ran through the entire planet. The pylons, those ancient structures that had held back the warp for millennia, began to crack. Abaddon had finally achieved his goal. The Blackstone fortress he had corrupted now hung directly above Cadia, and its reality-warping weapons fired in sequence, shattering the pylons one by one. The air itself began to tear, revealing the madness of the warp beneath. Celestine looked to the old man, desperation clear in her eyes. "Please, millions will die. Children, innocents, the faithful who have given everything to serve the Emperor's light. If you truly are divine, if you truly judge souls, then save them." The suited figure remained still as the world began to die around him, one hand resting on his walking stick. "I do not save. I do not condemn. I witness what each soul chooses in its final moments. That is my purpose. That is my gift to them." "Gift?" Celestine's voice broke. "You call watching our destruction a gift?" "The gift of knowing that when the end comes, someone bore witness to your choice. You are not forgotten. You are seen." Around them, soldiers screamed as the ground split open. Chunks of the planet's crust began to float upward, gravity failing as reality itself unraveled. A guardsman, no more than 16 years old, his lasgun empty and his squad dead around him, looked up at the gentleman in the dark suit and screamed with raw desperation. "Why won't you help us? Why won't you save us?" The old man turned his attention to the boy. For one perfect moment, that young soldier felt the full weight of an infinite consciousness focusing solely on him. He felt seen, truly seen, in a way that no human had ever experienced. Every choice he had ever made, every fear, every hope, every moment of courage and cowardice, all of it was known and acknowledged. Then, a piece of falling debris crushed him, and he was gone. The gentleman in the bowler hat watched him die. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He bore witness with perfect, terrible clarity. Celestine drew her blade, divine fire coursing along its edge. "If you will not save them, then you are complicit in their murder. I name you heretic. I name you demon. I name you false. I am none of those things. I am simply what I am. You may strike at me if you choose. It will change nothing. The living saint raised her blade high and brought it down with all the fury of her holy purpose. The blessed weapon which had slain greater daemons and shattered the armor of chaos champions passed through the old gentleman like cutting water. Celestine stumbled, her balance lost, her certainty shaken. The suited figure remained, untouched and unmoved, watching as Cadia died around them both. In orbit, Lord Castellan Creed made his final stand aboard his flagship as it burned. On the surface, millions of soldiers fought and died in the planet's last moments. Some fought with courage, some with fear, some with rage, some with resignation. And through it all, the gentleman watched. He saw every death, every sacrifice, every moment of heroism and cowardice. He judged nothing. He simply bore witness as the fortress world that had stood for 10,000 years finally fell. The news of Cadia's fall spread across the Imperium like a disease. Astropaths screamed themselves blind, transmitting the final messages. Entire sectors descended into panic as refugees fled the expanding Eye of Terror. But more disturbing than the loss of the fortress world was the report that followed. An elderly gentleman in a dark suit and bowler hat had appeared during the battle and done nothing. He had watched billions die without lifting a finger. He had refused Saint Celestine herself. And worst of all, he had not disappeared when Cadia fell. He had simply moved to another world, then another, always watching, never acting. On the hive world of Armageddon, workers in the lower factories looked up from their grinding labor to see the suited figure standing among them, his walking stick resting against a rusted support beam. He observed as overseers beat slaves who moved too slowly. He watched as children no older than 8 operated machinery that claimed fingers and hands. With mechanical regularity, he stood silent as a worker collapsed from exhaustion and was simply dragged away to be processed into nutrient paste for the other workers. The old gentleman offered no help, no comfort. He only witnessed, occasionally adjusting his bowler hat when sparks fell from above. On the agri-world of Gehenna Prime, he appeared in the punishment fields where political prisoners were worked to death harvesting crops. Men and women who had spoken against corrupt governors, who had questioned excessive tithes, who had dared to suggest that perhaps the Imperium asked too much of its citizens. They saw the kindly-faced elder in the anachronistic suit and begged for mercy, for justice, for intervention. The gentleman watched them die in the fields, their bodies left to fertilize the crops that would feed the Imperium's endless war machine. On Proxima Underhive, he manifested in the darkness where gangers murdered each other over scraps of food and drops of clean water. He stood in the midst of violence so casual and constant that the inhabitants barely registered it as unusual. Children killed children. The strong devoured the weak. And the suited figure observed it all with the same neutral attention he had given to Cadia's noble last stand. The ecclesiarchy, the religious arm of the Imperium, called for an emergency conclave. Cardinals from across the galaxy gathered on the shrine world of Ophelia 7, their golden vestments glittering in the light of 1 billion candles. The debate raged for 6 days and nights. Some declared the gentleman a daemon in disguise, sent by the dark gods to corrupt the faithful. Others insisted he must be a saint, a new aspect of the Emperor's divine will. Still others whispered that perhaps it was the Emperor himself, returned to judge his Imperium and finding it wanting. Cardinal Bohemond, the eldest among them at 300 years old through constant rejuvenate treatments, finally called for silence. We must know what this entity is. We must understand its purpose. The faithful across 1,000 worlds ask us for guidance, and we have none to give. This cannot stand. Then we send an inquisitor, suggested Cardinal Matthias, a younger man whose ambition burned as bright as his faith. Let the Holy Ordos determine the truth of this being. On the fortress monastery of Titan, hidden in the warp and shielded from the Immaterium by ancient technology, Inquisitor Lord Valdric of the Ordo Malleus received his orders. He was one of the Imperium's greatest witch hunters, a man who had faced down demons and traitors for 200 years. His psychic power was formidable, his faith unbreakable, his resolve absolute. If anyone could determine the nature of this mysterious entity, it would be him. Valdrek took a strike force of Grey Knights with him, those legendary space marines whose purpose was to fight the demonic. They were the Imperium's greatest warriors against supernatural threats, each one a Grey Knight's great tent, powerful psyker in his own right, each one clad in blessed armor covered in wards and prayers. If the suited figure proved to be a creature of chaos, they would destroy it or die trying. They found him on the mining world of Korun 5, standing in the center of a servitor processing facility. Hundreds of convicted criminals were being converted into servitors, their brains scooped out and replaced with simple computer systems, their bodies augmented with crude machinery. They would spend the rest of their existence as mindless slaves, performing repetitive tasks until their bodies finally gave out. Some of the criminals deserved this fate, murderers and traitors whose crimes were truly heinous. Others had merely failed to pay their taxes or spoken the Emperor's name without proper reverence. The gentleman made no distinction between them. He watched them all become servitors with the same impassive attention, his hands folded over the head of his walking stick. Valdrek approached with his force weapon drawn, psychic lightning crackling along its blade. His Grey Knights fanned out around him, their storm bolters trained on the suited figure. In the name of the God Emperor of mankind, Valdrek called out, his voice amplified by his armor's Vox system. I command you to identify yourself and submit to interrogation. The old gentleman turned to face them, tipping his bowler hat politely. For a moment, Valdrek felt his attention upon him, and in that moment he experienced something he had not felt in 2 centuries, doubt. This being saw him completely. Every secret he had kept, every compromise he had made in the Emperor's name, every innocent he had condemned because the alternative was worse. It knew him utterly, and it did not judge. Somehow, that absence of judgment was more terrible than any condemnation could have been. I am what you would call a witness. The thought appeared in Valdrek's mind. I observe all things. I judge all souls when they pass from this existence to whatever lies beyond. But I do not interfere with the choices made by living beings. Lies, Valdrek spat, though his voice shook slightly. You claim divine authority, yet you refuse to act against evil. You are either daemon or deceiver, and either way, you are an enemy of mankind. I am neither friend nor enemy. I simply am. You may attempt to destroy me if that is your choice. Valdrek raised his force weapon high and channeled his psychic might through it. The blade blazed with power drawn from the warp itself, purified through decades of training and absolute faith. This was a weapon that could cut through reality, that could slay creatures immune to mortal harm. He brought it down upon the gentleman with all his strength and all his power. The blade passed through the suited figure without resistance. Valdrek stumbled, his attack meeting no opposition whatsoever. He tried again, and again, pouring more psychic energy into each strike. Fire erupted from his hands, lightning crackled from his fingertips. Waves of pure force spent the air around them. The Grey Knights added their power to his. 6 of the Imperium's mightiest psykers combining their strength in a focused assault. The old man stood unmoved in the center of their attack, his bowler hat remaining perfectly positioned despite the psychic storm raging around him. The energies that should have obliterated a daemon prince, that could have cracked open a battle tank, simply flowed around and threw him like water around a stone. When the assault finally ended, when Valdrek and his Grey Knights stood exhausted and panting, the figure remained exactly as he had been. You cannot harm me, because I exist beyond your concepts of harm. I am not made of matter or energy as you understand them. I am consciousness, observing consciousness. I am the witness that must exist for existence to have meaning. Heresy, Valdrek whispered, but the word carried no power. For the first time in his long career, he faced something that his weapons could not touch, that his faith could not overcome, that his understanding could not grasp. The gentleman moved past him, his walking stick tapping softly on the metal floor as he walked deeper into the servitor facility. Valdrek and his Grey Knights followed, weapons still drawn, but useless. They watched as he observed every stage of the conversion process, The surgical removal of personality and memory, the installation of crude machines into human flesh. The final activation where a person became a thing, their soul still present but trapped in a body that could no longer respond to anything but simple commands. "Why do you watch this?" Valdrek demanded. "If you truly judge souls, how can you witness this horror and do nothing?" "Because they choose to do this. The Imperium chooses to convert its criminals into servitors. The tech priests choose to perfect the process. The criminals chose the actions that led to their punishment. All of it is choice. All of it matters. They are being punished for breaking the Emperor's law. This is justice. Is it?" The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Valdrek had no answer. He had never questioned the servitor process before. It was simply how things worked, how they had always worked, how they needed to work for the Imperium to function. The suited figure continued his observations, and Valdrek found himself watching alongside him, really seeing what was happening for the first time. A woman, perhaps 30 years old, was strapped to the conversion table. Her crime was listed as heresy, but the specific charge was that she had taught her children that the Emperor valued mercy as well as strength. For this, her mind would be destroyed, her body enslaved. She screamed as the machines descended, begged for forgiveness, called out for the Emperor to save her. The Emperor did not answer. The gentleman simply watched. And Valdrek, for the first time in 200 years, felt something close to shame. Over the following weeks, reports flooded in from across the Imperium. The suited figure appeared on Forge worlds where workers were grafted to their machines at birth and worked until death. He manifested on prison ships, where thousands lived in cages, barely large enough to stand. He stood witness in the underhives, where children born into darkness would never see the sun. He observed the black ships as they collected psychers, watching the terrified young people who would either serve the Emperor's Astronomicon or die in the attempt. Most disturbing of all, he appeared in places of genuine Imperial heroism and observed those with the same neutral attention. He watched Space Marines defend innocent civilians with no more emotion than he had shown watching servitor creation. He stood silent as Sisters of Battle sang hymns and healed the sick. He witnessed acts of true sacrifice and pure faith without offering approval or blessing. The Imperium did not know how to respond to an entity that treated their greatest triumphs and darkest shames with equal indifference. Then came the moment that changed everything. The gentleman manifested in the great cathedral of St. Dominica on Terra itself. The throne world, the heart of the Imperium. 10,000 priests were conducting the daily devotions, their voices raised in praise of the Emperor. Billions of faithful across the planet joined in prayer, their combined devotion creating a psychic wave that echoed through the warp. The suited figure appeared at the altar, standing where only the highest-ranking cardinals were permitted, his bowler hat in one hand, his walking stick in the other. The prayers faltered and died. 10,000 priests fell to their knees, some in worship, others in terror, none certain which response was correct. Cardinal Jakob, the master of the ecclesiarchy, stepped forward with his Crozius Arcanum raised high. "You dare to stand in the holiest place in the galaxy? You dare to defile the Emperor's most sacred temple? I defile nothing. I observe what humanity has built in his name." The thought touched every mind in the cathedral simultaneously. "I see the beauty of your faith and the horror of what you do with it. I see the genuine devotion and the naked corruption. I see it all, and I name it all equally valid expressions of the choices you have made." "The Emperor's will is absolute," Jakob declared, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "His word is law. His path is the only path. To suggest otherwise is the deepest heresy." The old gentleman's presence seemed to fill the cathedral, though he had not moved or grown larger. And what if the Emperor is wrong? The words struck like a physical blow. Priests collapsed, clutching their chests. Others screamed in anguish. Some laughed with the madness of shattered faith. Cardinal Jakob fell to his knees, his Crozius clattering to the marble floor. "Heresy," he whispered. "The greatest heresy ever spoken." "Not heresy. Question. If your Emperor is truly divine, can he be questioned? If your faith is truly strong, can it be challenged? Or does it only survive because you kill everyone who dares to think differently?
We kill heretics to protect humanity, Jakob said, but his voice lacked conviction.
We purge the corrupt to keep the faithful safe. We sacrifice the few to save the many. And in doing so, you become what you claim to fight against. The gentleman moved through the cathedral, his walking stick tapping softly on the marble floor. And everywhere he passed, priests saw themselves truly for the first time. They saw the compromises they had made, the cruelties they had justified, the suffering they had inflicted, all in the name of faith. You claim the Emperor protects, yet 10,000 die daily to maintain his Astronomicon. You claim to value human life, yet treat entire populations as expendable. You claim to fight tyranny, yet rule through absolute fear and control. Because we must, Jakob cried out. Because the galaxy is cruel and dark and full of horrors that would destroy us all if we showed weakness. Yes, and that is your choice. The old man's voice carried infinite sadness. You choose to become monsters to fight monsters. You choose to sacrifice mercy for survival. You choose to make every day a battle and every soul a weapon. These are valid choices, but they are still choices, and I bear witness to them all. The cathedral fell silent. 10,000 priests struggled with thoughts they had never been permitted to think, questions they had never been allowed to ask. In that moment of doubt, of genuine theological crisis, the foundations of the Imperium's faith cracked just slightly. And across the galaxy, wherever the suited figure appeared, others began to question as well. Not everyone, not even most, but enough. Enough to matter, enough to be dangerous. On the fortress world of Cadia's replacement, Agrippina, soldiers refused orders to execute their wounded comrades, claiming that if this divine witness judged such acts, they would not have that judgment on their souls. The commissars shot the dissenters, but more took their place. On the hive world of Necromunda, workers in the lower levels began to whisper that perhaps their suffering was not necessary, that perhaps the Imperium's demands were not the Emperor's will. The arbitrators cracked down hard, but the whispers spread faster than they could be silenced. On ships throughout the Imperial Navy, crews debated the nature of the suited figure in hushed voices between shifts. Some said he was the Emperor's judgment upon a failing Imperium. Others claimed he was the ultimate test of faith. None could agree, but all were changed by simply thinking about it. Inquisitor Lord Valdrek submitted his final report to the High Lords of Terra. In it, he wrote, "The entity cannot be destroyed, cannot be banished, and cannot be reasoned with in any conventional sense. He claims to exist beyond our reality, while simultaneously being present within it. He demonstrates no hostility toward humanity, yet his passive observation may be the greatest threat we have ever faced. He forces us to see ourselves truly, without the comfortable justifications we have built over 10 millennia. I recommend immediate action to contain the theological damage, though I confess I do not know what form such containment should take. For the first time in my service, I am uncertain of the path forward." The High Lords read his report in their chambers deep beneath the Imperial Palace. They looked at each other with worry plain on their faces. They had faced chaos invasions and Tyranid hive fleets and Orc WAAGHs and Necron dynasties. They had weathered rebellions and plagues and every horror the galaxy could produce. But this was something new. This was something that could not be fought with armies or faith or desperate courage. This was truth, patient and implacable, waiting for humanity to acknowledge what it had become. And somewhere far away, in the twisted realm of the Imperium, where reality and nightmare merged, 4 vast consciousnesses stirred. The Chaos Gods had noticed the suited figure as well, and they were very, very interested in this being that existed outside their influence. The warp churned with malevolent attention as 4 vast consciousnesses focused on a single point in real space. In the blood-soaked domain of Khorne, the Skull Throne trembled with rage. In the impossible gardens of Nurgle, decay paused in its eternal cycle. In the labyrinthine libraries of Tzientch, countless futures collapsed into a single thread. In the palaces of Slaanesh, excess itself grew still with anticipation. The Chaos Gods had witnessed the suited figure, and for the first time since their birth from humanity's darkest emotions, they encountered something they could not understand. The entity existed outside their influence, He walked through the Imperium untouched by physics. He observed their works without corruption or fear. This could not be tolerated. The Great Game demanded that all things serve one of the four, or be destroyed in the attempt to claim them. The gentleman would be tested, corrupted, or eliminated. There was no other option. On the daemon world of Scalantrax, where reality itself bled and screamed, the suited figure manifested without invitation or permission. The ground was made of fused bones, the sky dripped blood, and the air tasted of iron and rage. This was Khorne's domain, where the blood god's power was absolute. Daemons by the millions paused in their eternal warfare to stare at the old man who stood among them, his dark suit somehow remaining pristine, his bowler hat perfectly positioned, his walking stick planted firmly on the bone ground. From the largest skull pyramid, a figure descended. Valkar the Eternal, Daemon Prince of Khorne, was 40 feet tall and clad in armor forged from the bones of saints. His axe, World Ender, had claimed 10 billion skulls across 1,000 years of slaughter. He was rage given form, violence made manifest, the blood god's greatest champion. He landed before the gentleman with enough force to crack the bone ground, his voice a roar that could be heard across the entire daemon world. You stand in the domain of Khorne, blood god, lord of skulls, master of battle. Kneel or be destroyed. The old man regarded him with perfect calm, his kind features showing no fear. He adjusted his bowler hat slightly. I kneel to nothing. I am here to observe what you have become. Valkar's fury was so intense that daemons near him spontaneously combusted from the psychic heat. Observe. You dare stand in the presence of Khorne's greatest servant and offer no challenge, no battle cry, no plea for mercy? He raised World Ender high, the axe screaming with the voices of all the souls it had consumed. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne. Your death will be glorious. The Daemon Prince swung with enough force to split a battle tank in half. The axe passed through the suited figure like cutting smoke. Valkar stumbled, confused and enraged. He attacked again and again, each strike passing through the old gentleman without effect. He unleashed waves of psychic fury that should have boiled flesh and shattered bones. The gentleman remained unchanged, untouched, observing his rage with clinical interest, his mustache not even ruffled by the psychic storm. You cannot harm me because I exist beyond harm. I am not made of matter or spirit, as you understand them. I am the witness. I observe what choices lead to, even the choice to serve the blood god. Then you are a coward. Valkar roared. You hide behind invulnerability and judge those who actually fight. Khorne despises cowards above all else. I do not judge. I witness. There is a difference. You chose to serve Khorne. You chose to become this thing of rage and violence. That choice has consequences, and I bear witness to them all. For the first time in 1,000 years, Valkar felt something other than rage. He felt doubt. What was the purpose of battle if there was no witness? What was glory if it was observed with the same neutral attention as cowardice? His identity, his entire existence, was built on the foundation that his violence mattered, that his rage had meaning, that his service to Khorne elevated him above other beings. But this old gentleman watched his fury with no more reaction than he might watch a leaf falling from a tree. His violence was not special. It was simply another choice, another path, no more or less significant than any other. The doubt lasted only a heartbeat before rage consumed it. Valkar threw back his head and screamed, and across Khorne's domain, every daemon joined in. The psychic wave of pure fury washed over the suited figure, like a tsunami of blood and fire. And still he stood unchanged, bearing witness to their rage with perfect, terrible patience. In the crystal labyrinth, where Tsiench wove plots within plots within plots, the gentleman appeared at the center of the impossible maze. The architect of fate sat upon his throne of ever-changing light, his form shifting through 1,000 possibilities every second. 9 lords of change, the greatest of his daemon servants, circled above, their wings trailing fire and lightning. Welcome, witness. Tsiench spoke, his voice containing contradictory tones that shouldn't be able to exist simultaneously. I have foreseen your arrival through 999 possible futures. In 800 of them, you join my service. In 198, you are destroyed. In one, you remain as you are. Which future will manifest, I wonder? I will remain as I am. I do not join. I do not serve. I observe. Xianch laughed, and the sound was the tinkling of breaking glass and the grinding of continental plates. But you see, that is the beauty of it. You cannot remain unchanged because observation itself changes the observer. You have witnessed humanity's darkness, the Imperium's cruelty, Khorne's rage. Each observation adds to what you are. And what you are becoming is delicious possibility. The Lords of Change descended, each one weaving spells of impossible complexity. They wove paradoxes designed to trap consciousness in infinite loops. They created logic puzzles that had no solution but drove the solver mad in the attempt. They showed the old gentleman visions of futures where his observation caused catastrophic changes, where his presence destroyed everything he sought to witness. "Watch this future," one daemon crooned, showing a vision of the Imperium collapsing into civil war over the nature of the suited figure, trillions dying because of theological disputes about his meaning. See how your passive observation has consequences. You cannot witness without affecting. Therefore, you already interfere simply by existing. Or this future, another added, displaying a reality where the gentleman's neutral judgment of chaos led millions to serve the dark gods, believing that if such a cosmic entity saw no difference between good and evil, then morality itself was meaningless. Your refusal to condemn us is an endorsement. Your silence speaks, louder than any words. The visions multiplied, fracturing into countless branches. The suited figure stood at the center of them all, his walking stick planted firmly as reality swirled around him, each future showing a different consequence of his existence, each one leading to suffering and chaos in its own unique way. The paradox was elegant and cruel. To observe was to influence, but to refuse to observe was to abandon consciousness to meaninglessness. There was no path that did not lead to some form of harm. Xianch leaned forward on his throne, eagerness bleeding from every shifting feature. Do you see? You cannot escape causality. You claim to grant free will through your observation, but your very presence shapes the choices available. Join me, and we can explore these possibilities together. Think of the knowledge we could gain, the futures we could witness. The old gentleman's presence expanded, and suddenly, Xianch found himself looking at every possible version of himself across all potential timelines simultaneously. He saw futures where he achieved ultimate victory, and futures where he was utterly destroyed. He saw the heat death of the universe and its infinite rebirth. He saw every plot he had ever woven and every plot that had been woven against him. He saw all of it at once, the totality of possibility laid bare. I have already seen all your futures, architect. I have witnessed every scheme you will ever devise and every outcome they will produce. I need not join you to understand you. I already do, completely and utterly. And I observe that your endless plotting is simply another form of servitude. You claim to be the god of change, yet you cannot change what you are. For one perfect moment, Xianch experienced something his nature should have made impossible. He was surprised. Then the moment passed, and the suited figure was gone, leaving the chaos god to contemplate the uncomfortable truth he had revealed. In the garden of Nurgle, where entropy and rebirth danced in eternal cycle, the gentleman stood among trees of crystallized disease and flowers that bloomed with beautiful plagues. Grandfather Nurgle, the most jovial of the chaos gods, approached with his arms spread wide in greeting. His vast form leaked pus and swarmed with flies, yet his face held genuine warmth. Welcome, dear witness. Welcome. Come, let me show you the beauty of my garden. Here, everything has its place. Death feeds life. Decay creates new growth. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is truly lost. Is this not magnificent? The suited figure walked beside the plague god, his walking stick tapping softly on the diseased ground, observing as daemons of Nurgle tended to their diseased gardens with genuine love and care. There was no malice here, no cruelty for its own sake. Nurgle truly believed he was offering gifts, that his plagues were blessings that released mortals from the fear of death and the burden of hope. "See how they suffer no more," Nurgle said, gesturing to a pool where souls floated in blissful decay. "They accept the inevitable. They embrace the cycle. Is this not mercy compared to the Imperium's endless, futile struggle against entropy?" The old gentleman knelt beside the pool, careful not to let his suit touch the filth, looking at the souls trapped in Nurgle's embrace. They were free from pain, free from fear, free from striving. They had surrendered to decay and found peace in that surrender. And yet, they were trapped, frozen in the moment of their giving up, never moving forward, never truly changing despite Nurgle's claims of endless cycle. You offer them escape from suffering through the cessation of growth. They accept decay because fighting it was too hard. This is not mercy. This is the seduction of giving up. Nurgle's jovial expression flickered for just a moment. But is it wrong to rest? Is it wrong to accept what cannot be changed? The Imperium fights for 10,000 years, sacrificing everything. And what do they gain? More war, more death, more suffering. I offer an end to the struggle. Is that not kindness? It is a choice. Like all choices, it has consequences. They choose comfort over growth, peace over struggle, acceptance over defiance. I witness their choice and the souls they become through making it. Then witness this, Nurgle said, and suddenly the gentleman found himself in a vision of the Imperium's future. Humanity ground down by endless war. Every generation born into suffering, every life measured only by how long it could serve before breaking. Children who never knew joy, adults who never knew peace, elderly who died still fighting with no rest ever earned. Is my gift not better than this? Is eternal decay not preferable to eternal war? The vision shifted, showing those same humans fighting despite everything. A mother defending her children though she knew she would die. A soldier holding the line though retreat would save his life. A saint, sacrificing herself for people she would never meet. The nobility of defiance, the beauty of struggle, the meaning found in fighting even when victory was impossible. Both futures are valid, the old man observed, standing once more. Both are choices. You offer escape from suffering through surrender. The Imperium offers meaning through sacrifice. Neither is objectively superior. Both are simply different responses to an uncaring universe. Nurgle stared at the suited figure, and his expression shifted from jovial to something far older and sadder. You truly do not judge, do you? You see my garden of decay and the Imperium's ocean of blood, and you name them both equally valid expressions of choice. How can you bear it? How can you witness such suffering and remain unchanged? Because if I changed, if I acted, I would remove the very thing that makes existence meaningful. Free will requires that choices have consequences that are witnessed but not prevented. I am the witness that must exist for choice to matter. The plague god reached out as if to touch the old gentleman, but his hand passed through him like smoke. Then you are the loneliest being in all existence, forever watching, never acting, bearing witness to every horror, every tragedy, every moment of suffering, with the power to end it all but the nature that prevents you from doing so. I pity you, witness. I truly do. The gentleman did not respond, and Nurgle turned away, returning to his garden. For the first time in eons, the plague god tended his diseases without joy. In the palace of Slaanesh, where excess knew no bounds and sensation ruled supreme, the suited figure materialized in halls of impossible beauty and terrible pain. The dark prince of chaos reclined upon a throne of fused souls, their faces frozen in expressions of agony and ecstasy indistinguishable from each other. Slaanesh regarded the newcomer with predatory interest. How delightful. A being that has witnessed everything yet feels nothing. Or do you feel everything and simply hide it perfectly? I must know. I must experience what you experience. Daemonettes surrounded the old gentleman, each one more beautiful and terrible than the last. They promised pleasures beyond mortal comprehension, sensations that would make the nerves sing with joy and pain intermingled. They offered to show him what it meant to truly feel, to experience existence rather than merely observing it. The gentleman stood unmoved, his hands folded over his walking stick. You offer intensity of experience as if it were meaning itself, the old man observed. But sensation without purpose is just noise. You have built an entire realm from the pursuit of feeling, and yet your servants are no closer to satisfaction than when they began. They chase sensation because they have nothing else, not because it brings them peace. Slaanesh laughed, a sound like crystal breaking and silk tearing. Peace is for the dead and the dull. We seek not peace, but experience. Not rest, but ecstasy. And you, dear witness, you are the ultimate untouched thing. Imagine the pleasure of finally making you feel something. Imagine the triumph of breaking your perfect neutrality. The Dark Prince unleashed the full force of sensation directly into the old gentleman's consciousness. Every possible feeling compressed into a single instant. The joy of birth and the agony of death. The pleasure of success and the pain of failure. Love and hate and everything between, all at maximum intensity, all at once. The suited figure absorbed it all and remained unchanged, his bowler hat still perfectly positioned. I have witnessed every sensation that consciousness can experience across countless beings throughout time. What you offer as overwhelming is simply data. I observe it, catalog it, and witness its effects on those who experience it. But I am not moved by it because I exist to observe, not to feel. For the first time, Slaanesh experienced something close to frustration. The Dark Prince had corrupted saints and space marines, had broken the most disciplined minds with carefully applied excess. But this being could not be seduced, because he had no desires to exploit, no needs to fulfill, no hungers to feed. Then what do you want? Slaanesh demanded, genuine curiosity breaking through the facade of cruel amusement. Every being wants something. Even the ascetics want peace. Even the martyrs want meaning. What do you desire? To witness. Nothing more, nothing less. I exist so that, when beings make choices, someone observes the consequences. I am the cosmic acknowledgement that your actions matter, because they are seen. Slaanesh stared at the gentleman for a long moment, then dismissed him with a wave. How boring. You are the most disappointing thing I have encountered in millennia. A being of infinite awareness with zero passion. Go. Observe your meaningless universe. I have no use for you. The suited figure departed the palace, leaving Slaanesh alone with a feeling the chaos god had never experienced before. Dissatisfaction that could not be remedied through excess. In the highest reaches of the warp, where the four chaos gods met in their endless great game, they convened to discuss their failure. For the first time in their existence, they had encountered something they could not corrupt, could not destroy, could not even understand. The gentleman existed outside their influence entirely. It must be eliminated, Khorne growled. It witnesses our works without fear. It diminishes glory. It cannot be eliminated, Tzeentch responded. It exists in a state beyond our reach, but perhaps it need not be. Its mere existence changes things. Observe how the Imperium fractures over interpreting its meaning. Let them fracture, Nurgle sighed. Let them question and doubt. It changes nothing. They will still suffer. They will still die. They will still feed us. But will they? Slaanesh mused. This being offers them something we cannot. The assurance that their choices are witnessed without judgment. That is not salvation, but it is something. And something is more than we wish them to have. The four chaos gods reached an accord. They could not destroy the suited figure, could not corrupt him, could not even truly affect him. But they could affect how mortals responded to him. They could ensure that his neutral observation was interpreted in ways that served the dark god's purposes. If he would not choose a side, they would make certain that his existence benefited chaos regardless. And in the Imperium, the gentleman continued his journey, moving from world to world, always observing, never acting. He had passed the trial of the chaos gods not through strength or resistance, but simply by being what he was. They had tried to corrupt him with rage, with possibility, with decay, with excess, and found nothing in him that could be corrupted because there was nothing in him that desired anything. But now he turned toward Terra, toward the imperial palace, toward the golden throne where another vast consciousness waited. The Emperor had watched the old gentleman's journey through the chaos god's domains. He had witnessed the witness, and he had questions that 10,000 years of isolation had prepared him to ask. The true test was yet to come. The journey to Terra took no time at all, because the gentleman did not travel through space in any conventional sense. He simply ceased to be on one world and began to be on another. The throne world of humanity appeared beneath him, a planet transformed over millennia into a fortress of continental proportions. From orbit, Terra resembled a massive machine more than a living world, its surface covered in structures that reached into the clouds and burrowed miles beneath the surface. At the heart of it all stood the Imperial Palace, larger than nations, more complex than star systems, built over 10,000 years by trillions of hands. The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guards, detected the suited figure's arrival before he fully manifested. These golden warriors, each one a masterwork of genetic engineering and training that made space marines seem crude by comparison, took up defensive positions around the palace's innermost sanctums. They did not expect to stop this entity. Their weapons had proven useless against him across a dozen worlds, but they would witness his approach. That was their duty, eternal and absolute. The old gentleman appeared at the Eternity Gate, the massive adamantium door that guarded the final approach to the throne room. Each door panel was 300 feet tall and inscribed with the names of every hero who had ever given their life defending the Emperor. There were billions of names, written in script so tiny that human eyes could not read them without magnification. The gentleman read them all in an instant, bearing witness to each sacrifice, each choice to die rather than let darkness claim the throne world. The shield captain of the Custodes stood before the gate, his guardian spear held across his chest in salute rather than challenge. He wore no helmet, and his face showed the marks of 3,000 years of service. His name was Valdor, though none now living remembered if that was truly his name or simply a title he had inherited from the greatest of his order who had disappeared millennia ago. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The Emperor awaits you within. He has cleared the throne room of all attendants. You will face him alone, as he desires. But know this, witness. If you bring harm to the master of mankind, there is nowhere in this universe or any other where you will find safety from our vengeance. I bring no harm. I bring only observation, the same as I have brought to all things. Valdor studied the suited figure for a long moment, his enhanced eyes seeing things that mortal vision could not. That may be the most dangerous thing of all. Go. He has waited 10,000 years for this conversation. The Eternity Gate swung open without sound, revealing a corridor that stretched impossibly far. The gentleman moved forward, his walking stick tapping softly on the marble floor, and the gate closed behind him with the finality of a tomb ceiling. The fact of the corridor was lined with statues of the Primarchs, the Emperor's 20 sons, who had once led humanity's great crusade to conquer the galaxy. 18 stood in alcoves of honor. 2 were missing, their spaces empty except for chains and marks of censure. 9 faced outward with weapons raised in eternal vigilance. 9 faced inward with weapons lowered in eternal shame. The suited figure walked past them all, observing the artistry that had gone into each statue, the way they captured not just physical form, but the essence of what each Primarch had been. Here was Guilliman the statesman, there was Russ the savage, beyond them Sanguinius the angel, and Dorn the wall. Each one had made choices that shaped the Imperium, for better and worse. Each one had been both hero and failure in different measures. The corridor ended at a chamber so vast that its boundaries disappeared into shadow despite the golden light that emanated from its center. The throne room was not merely large, it was a space designed to humble, to inspire, to crush any sense of individual importance. A single human standing in that chamber would feel like a grain of sand on an endless beach. The ceiling rose miles overhead, supported by columns carved from single pieces of stone, each one inscribed with the entire history of a world conquered during the Great Crusade. At the center of the chamber, raised upon a platform that required 1,000 steps to climb, sat the Golden Throne. The device was a marriage of technology and psychic architecture beyond human comprehension, built by the Emperor himself in ages past for purposes that had been perverted by necessity. It had once been a gateway, a means to travel through the webway that the ancient Eldar had used. Now it was a prison, and a life support system, and a psychic beacon all at once. Upon the throne sat what remained of the Emperor of mankind. His physical body had withered over 10 millennia until it barely resembled the golden warrior who had once walked among humanity. Desiccated flesh clung to bones. Life support systems pumped fluids through veins that had long since lost the ability to function on their own. His face, once perfect and terrible in its beauty, had become a skull covered in parchment-thin skin. Only his eyes remained alive, burning with golden light that spoke of consciousness far beyond mortal limitations. But the physical form was almost irrelevant. What mattered was the psychic presence, the vast consciousness that pressed against reality itself, holding back the tides of the warp through sheer force of will. The Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that made faster-than-light travel possible, blazed from the Emperor's mind across the entire galaxy. Without it, humanity would be isolated, divided, doomed. Maintaining it required the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers every single day, their souls burned as fuel for a light that must never fade. The gentleman ascended the 1,000 steps without force, pausing, without hesitation, his walking stick tapping a steady rhythm. He reached the platform and stood before the golden throne, two beings of incomprehensible power regarding each other across a gulf of understanding that neither could fully bridge. When the Emperor spoke, his voice was not sound but thought impressed directly into consciousness, a psychic communication more intimate than any spoken words could ever be. You have come at last. I have watched your journey through my realm with great interest and greater concern. You claim to observe without judgment, yet your very presence judges us by comparison to what we might have been. I observe what is. What might have been is irrelevant. You chose this path for humanity. They chose to follow it. These choices have consequences, and I bear witness to them. Do you understand what you witness? The Emperor's presence expanded, and suddenly the suited figure found himself experiencing the Emperor's perspective, seeing through eyes that had watched humanity since before recorded history began. Born as a human in ancient times, he had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the slow crawl of progress, the repeated mistakes that each generation made as if they were new. He had seen the age of strife, when humanity's first great empire collapsed into horror and madness. He had watched worlds burn and humans devolve into savagery or worse, and he had made a choice. He could no longer stand apart and merely observe. He had taken control, unified Terra through brutal conquest, then launched the Great Crusade to reunite humanity across the stars. He had created the Primarchs, his sons, genetic masterworks designed to lead his armies. He had built an empire on faith, suppression, and absolute authority, because he had witnessed what unrestricted belief and freedom had produced. The birth of chaos gods from humanity's collective unconscious. Entities that fed on emotion and twisted entire civilizations into nightmare. This is what observation without action produces, the Emperor declared. I watched for 30,000 years before I finally acted. Do you know how many humans died in that time? How many civilizations fell? How many horrors were born because I chose to merely witness rather than intervene? And how many have died since you chose to act? The old gentleman's question hung in the vast space between them. How many worlds have you burned? How many innocents have you sacrificed? How many futures have you destroyed? In the name of the future you chose. Billions. Trillions. I do not shy from this accounting. Every death weighs upon my consciousness. Every sacrifice haunts me. But the alternative was extinction. Humanity faced foes that would have wiped us from existence. The Orcs, the Eldar, the forces of chaos itself. Without unity, without discipline, without absolute faith in a single vision, we would have been scattered and devoured. And yet here you are, the gentleman observed, trapped upon this throne for 10,000 years while your empire slowly rots. Your sons turned against you. Half your space marines fell to chaos. The very thing you fought to prevent, the dominance of supernatural forces over human affairs, has come to pass regardless. Your choices did not prevent the darkness. They simply changed its form. For the first time in 10 millennia, the Emperor felt something close to anger. You speak from a position of absolute safety. You cannot be harmed, cannot be corrupted, cannot fail because you risk nothing. You offer no alternative, no solution, only observation of failure. What purpose does such observation serve? It serves the purpose of witnessing that choices matter. Every human who has ever lived made choices that shaped their soul and their reality. Those choices meant something because they were witnessed, not judged, not prevented, but acknowledged. I am the guarantee that existence is not meaningless, that actions have consequences that matter, beyond their immediate effects. The Emperor's psychic presence pressed closer, and the suited figure felt the full weight of 10,000 years of isolation, of sacrifice, of responsibility beyond mortal comprehension. Then tell me, witness, was I wrong? Should I have continued to observe while humanity tore itself apart? Should I have let the chaos gods claim every human soul without resistance? Should I have valued individual freedom over collective survival? You ask me to judge when my nature is to witness, but I will answer your question with truth. You were not wrong, but neither were you right. You made a choice based on the information and perspective you had. That choice had consequences, both intended and unintended. The Imperium you built has saved countless lives and destroyed countless lives. It has elevated humanity and degraded humanity. It has created saints and monsters, often in the same person. All of this is true simultaneously. That is not an answer. The Emperor's frustration bled through his psychic communication. That is philosophical cowardice dressed as wisdom. No, it is the acknowledgement that complex problems do not have simple solutions. You chose to become a god to fight gods. You chose to demand absolute faith to combat chaos. You chose to sacrifice billions to save trillions. These were valid choices made by a being trying to solve impossible problems. But they were still choices, and choices always have costs. The Emperor fell silent, his vast consciousness turning inward. The gentleman waited, bearing witness to the internal struggle of a being who had not questioned his path in 10,000 years. Around them, the golden throne hummed with power, its systems never resting, just as the Emperor's vigil never rested. You offer no comfort, the Emperor finally thought. No validation. No condemnation either. You simply hold up a mirror and force me to see what I have become. That is what witnesses do. We reflect truth without distortion. The Emperor's presence seemed to contract, pulling back into the withered form upon the throne. When he spoke again, his psychic voice carried a weariness that transcended time itself. I offered another being 3 choices recently. A Kryptonian, the last of his kind, who possessed power comparable to my Primarch's. I offered him the chance to return to his reality, to remain free in this one, or to serve me as a sanctioned instrument of my will. He chose service. He chose to surrender his freedom for the chance to do good within the structure I have built. Do you judge that choice? I witnessed it. He chose meaning over freedom, because in this reality, absolute freedom leads to chaos. He accepted necessary compromise because he understood that his ideals could not survive unchanged in this universe. It was a valid choice, and he will live with its consequences. And what of me? The Emperor's question carried the weight of true vulnerability. What choice do you offer me, witness? I am bound to this throne. I cannot leave without dooming humanity. I cannot change the Imperium's course without causing collapse. I cannot undo 10,000 years of theological conditioning. What choice remains to me? The same choice that exists in every moment for every conscious being. How you respond to the situation you are in. You can continue exactly as you have, maintaining the brutal status quo because change is too dangerous. You can attempt reform, risking catastrophe for the possibility of improvement. You can surrender, allowing the Imperium to fall and whatever comes after to be born from its ashes. Or you can do something none of those options include, something I cannot predict because it has not yet been chosen. The Emperor regarded the suited figure with his burning golden eyes. And what would you do in my place? I cannot answer that because I am not you. I do not face your choices. I only witness what you choose and acknowledge that the choice was yours to make. Sound like laughter, bitter and ancient, echoed through the psychic space between them. You are correct about one thing, witness. You are indeed the cruelest god. You offer the burden of absolute freedom while demonstrating absolute detachment. You make every being responsible for their choices while providing no guidance on which choices are correct. You witness suffering without alleviating it, observe evil without condemning it, and acknowledge good without celebrating it. How do mortals not go mad from such cosmic indifference? Some do. Most create meaning for themselves through faith, through purpose, through connection with others. They make their choices and live with the consequences, without needing cosmic validation. That is the strength of mortal consciousness. They do not need a witness to give their lives meaning. Yet I witness anyway because the act of observation matters regardless of whether they know they are observed. The Emperor fell silent again, processing this perspective across the vast computational power of his consciousness. Finally, he spoke with something approaching resolution. I will not change my course, witness. I cannot. The Imperium is too vast, too fragile, too essential to human survival. But I acknowledge what I have become. I acknowledge the cost of every choice I have made. And I accept that future generations will judge me as I once judged those who came before me. That is the burden of action. That is a valid choice, and I witness it. Then witness this as well. The Emperor's psychic presence blazed with sudden intensity. I do not permit you to remain within the Imperium's borders. Your presence destabilizes the faith that holds humanity together. You force questions that have no safe answers. You offer a perspective that undermines the necessary certainty my people require to fight against darkness. Leave this reality. Return to wherever you came from. Or I will spend every resource at my disposal attempting to destroy you, even if it costs billions of lives in the attempt. The suited figure regarded the Emperor with perfect calm, his kind features showing no fear or concern. He adjusted his bowler hat slightly. That also is a valid choice, and I will make my own choice in response. For a long moment, nothing moved. Two consciousnesses of incomprehensible power stood locked in a confrontation that had no precedent. Then the gentleman spoke his final words to the master of mankind. I will not leave. I will remain in this reality, observing what humanity chooses to become. I will witness your Imperium's triumphs and failures. I will watch as individuals make choices that elevate or degrade them. And when the end comes, whether in victory or extinction, I will have borne witness to it all. You cannot destroy me. You cannot corrupt me. You cannot make me leave. So you must simply accept that I am here, watching, witnessing, acknowledging that all your choices matter because they are seen. The Emperor's rage was a psychic storm that would have shattered lesser minds. But the suited figure remained unmoved, unchanged, exactly as he had been when facing the Chaos God's temptations. After an eternity compressed into seconds, the storm subsided. Then you condemn yourself to eternal isolation, the Emperor thought, and his psychic voice carried genuine pity. You will watch humanity struggle and suffer, unable to help, unable to intervene, bearing witness to horrors that even my ancient consciousness finds difficult to endure. You will see good people make terrible choices and evil people triumph through clever choices. You will observe meaning and meaninglessness in equal measure. And through it all, you will remain alone. The only consciousness that truly understands what it witnesses but can never share that understanding. That is a hell worse than anything the Chaos Gods have devised. It is the hell I choose, the old gentleman replied. Because without a witness, all of existence becomes meaningless. I bear the burden so that others do not have to. The Emperor had no response to this. The gentleman descended from the platform, his walking stick tapping softly on each of the 1,000 steps, walking back through the vast chamber, past the statues of the Primarchs, through the impossible corridor, and out through the eternity gate that opened silently at his approach. Valdor stood waiting outside, his guardian spear held ready. The shield captain studied the suited figure carefully, searching for any sign that the Emperor had been harmed or corrupted. Finding none, he stepped aside and saluted with military precision. What happened in there? He asked, breaking protocol because the question burned too brightly to be contained. Two beings discussed the nature of choice and consequence. Nothing changed, and everything changed. That is all I will say. The gentleman departed from Terra, appearing across the galaxy on thousands of worlds simultaneously. On Armageddon, he watched workers return to their grinding labor. On Gehenna Prime, he observed prisoners die in the fields. On Cadia's replacement world, he witnessed soldiers execute the weak while preparing to face enemies that would destroy them without mercy. On prosperous worlds and dying worlds, on ships traveling through the warp and stations floating in the void, the suited figure appeared and observed. And slowly, gradually, humanity began to change, not because he demanded it, but because they knew they were being watched by something that neither condemned nor condoned, that simply witnessed and remembered. Some found this liberating. They made choices based on what they believed was right, rather than what authority demanded. Others found it terrifying. They clung harder to the certainty of imperial doctrine, desperate for guidance in the face of cosmic indifference. The Imperium did not collapse. It continued grinding forward through the centuries, as brutal and necessary as ever. But, within it, individuals began to question just slightly more than they had before. Not enough to trigger rebellion, but enough to remember that they had choices, that their actions mattered, that someone was watching. On the Golden Throne, the Emperor continued his eternal vigil, burning through 1,000 souls every day to maintain the light that humanity needed to survive. But now he did so with the full weight of acknowledgement that another consciousness bore witness to every sacrifice, every compromise, every horror committed in his name. And in the warp, the Chaos Gods watched the suited figure with frustration and fascination, unable to claim him, but benefiting from the doubt he inspired. The great game continued. The war eternal raged on. And somewhere between all of it, an elderly gentleman in a dark suit and bowler hat stood as a silent observer, bearing witness to humanity's choices in the grim darkness where there was only war. Not judging, not intervening, simply acknowledging that every choice, every sacrifice, every moment of courage or cowardice mattered because someone saw it, someone remembered it, someone witnessed what they chose to become. The cruelest god was not one who demanded sacrifice. It was one who granted absolute freedom and then watched with perfect clarity as beings struggled with the terrible burden of choice.